right. You're probably getting to a phase where your team is starting to use your graphics in their game for testing. If they're not doing that already, they probably will be pretty soon. Let's talk for a second about how to make sure that your graphics are looking as good as they can get. I apologize. This is Nicole's little dragon because he's adorable, but also because there's some really good motion blur in there. And I wanted to analyze how you export that can affect how that'll look. Anyway, if I go back into this one and if I zoom in, this is the sort of launching phase of this little dragon. You can see that there's a lot of blur on this. I can see in this version that there's a little bit of clipping here too, where it looks like it got sort of cropped off. So sometimes if that happens, I like to work non-destructively and always put masks on things, but I can make a really soft. I'm using Control and Option again to soften my brush, and I can just sort of soften up that little edge right there. So there's not just like a hard edge with that, just in case. The way she has this exported it, she has it as a GIF. She set up all the settings just right, so it works just fine. And if I looked at this as just a ping sequence, you can see that it looks just fine here. So some of your GIF animations, you might want to look at them, and you might notice if you drag it into a browser and look at it against a dark background, it looks okay. But if you look at it in a preview, you'll notice that there's like a dark sort of shadow around wherever there's blur or transparency. So if that happens, you're going to have to go back and try to experiment with different export settings. So I want to show you some ways of approaching that. So if we go to File, and again, this is from Photoshop, and we go to Export Save for Web Legacy, and we wait for this to show up. So I have it on that particular frame so that I can kind of look at that detail, and I'm going to try to find those wings. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit so this first one here, you can see this is the original. And I want to try to preserve that quality as best I can. Now, this is the export setting. I think this is pretty close to what Nicole ended up using. And for a GIF, this works out really, really well. There's some really nice qualities to this. She worked really hard to try to give it that sort of transparency, but minimize how it looks, basically. So that works out really very well. It's very effectively done. But for some of your games, that might not look good. So the other thing is, so I'll leave that one there. If I go down to this one and I use one of the presets for the GIF animation, if I go to say, okay, let's do a really high quality GIF, 64 dithered, you can see it looks like crazy. So some of you might be noticing that you're getting like if I zoom out, you can see just how wild that looks. You might be getting shadows or blown out areas with your GIF rendering. So if that happens, again, you have to adjust these settings in here. So 64 colors is pretty good. You can see it looks really good in here, but obviously that transparency is not working out. So transparency is checked, but I have to go to diffusion transparency. And now you can see it's giving me that transparency. And the way it's handling that is it's just sort of putting little dots around in order to make it look like it's kind of transparent. So sometimes you'll have to really experiment with that to get just the right amount. So if I pull this down a little bit, the amount of diffusion, it makes it a little bit less, dots just kind of everywhere. But if I pull this up a little bit more, a little higher than what Nicole had, it starts to bring back some of that kind of blur quality. But you aren't actually limited to GIFs. So if I save this and I wanted to just be able to throw this GIF into a web browser and watch it animate, like that's the beauty of GIFs, is that you just uploaded it to a web browser and it's animated and you can test it out. So it's a really great way of testing animations and sharing those animations. But for exporting it for a game engine, you don't actually have to use GIFs for animation. You can just export them as individual pings. And as long as it's clear to your programmers what order they go in, then you can do that. So if I select this one and I set this to say ping 24, you can see it's almost indistinguishable from the original. So I could even drop this down to like ping 8. Okay, ping 8 looks pretty terrible. We won't do that one. And that's because this is also dithered. So I'm going to change this back to diffusion dithered, and then I kind of have the same problem as I did before. But ping 24 looks really, really good. So if you find that like you don't like this dot pattern, you actually don't have to have that. Now, the reason why we use GIFs rather than pings is look at that file size. This is quite a bit smaller than that ping file. If you're making games for really slow web browsers, that does make a big difference. But for these game maker games, it really doesn't. So if I decide like, hey, yeah, I like how this ping looks, that's what I want to use, it's set to transparent. I don't think we need to do anything with the mat. I can't remember, but we'll find out. And then I say save. And then I just got to say jump animation. I'm just going to save this to a new folder. Jump. Say save. Let me wait. And then I have to try to figure out where I actually put that folder. Right. Okay. So there, it just saves that one ping file. So you have to do it like frame by frame. That's the only thing that's a little bit of a drag. But I mean, the other thing you can do is you can select a whole bunch of frames, and you can do export layers to files, and then you can set each file type to be a ping 24. So, and it'll just number them, jump animation 01, 02, 03, and so on. So there's a couple different ways to speed up this process, but you want to balance that dithering on transparent areas. So especially if you're using motion blur, if you have things that are transparent, you want them to look really good. If you don't have any kind of motion blur, or you don't have any transparency to worry about, don't worry about it. Just do the GIF animation. It'll look the same. But if you do have transparency, you probably want to save them as ping files.